Good afternoon, everyone. May I ask those of you coming back from lunch to settle down? We will begin. So thank you all for being here. It's been a great festival so far, and we have with us one of, I think, India's foremost women writers, not just women writers. Just to start off, those of us who've been reading, writing from India in English for the past 5 decades, or perhaps longer, will remember some books and some writers for specific reasons. There are big blockbusters and celebrated award winners. There are those who make waves because of political or cultural controversy. And then there are those who work quietly, persistently, inserting their pages into your consciousness, telling stories that are at once familiar and startling. Familiar because these are characters and situations that we have lived with or lived through. Startling because we never quite have seen them in this particular way. Manju Kapoor's work is in this category. Her first book, Difficult Daughters, won the Commonwealth Prize for Best First Novel in the Eurasia region. And I think the moment you say Manju Kapoor, that's the first book that comes to mind. But there have been 6 books after that, and we're talking about the 7th book right now. And the books have really consolidated her position as a leading figure in the Indian literary landscape. Her 7th novel, The Gallery, which is on sale in the Book Point stall, has just been published in 2023, and it's been described as, and I quote, quietly brilliant. In fact, quiet is the adjective that pops up time and again when you look at commentaries or blurbs on her book, and of course, the many talks that she's given. In an era where success in any field of artistic production is framed, tied up in shiny bows, and paraded on social media, Manju Kapoor is the quiet anomaly. But enough about me talking about her when we have her on the stage right here, and we can listen to her talk about her work and maybe a little bit about herself. Thank you, Manju, if I may, for accepting our invitation to come to Hyderabad Literary Festival. So perhaps to begin with, you could talk a little bit about the trajectory of your work and your books. You see, as a reader, you see resonances across them in terms of context, in terms of the kinds of negotiations women particularly have to make. But how do you look at the journey between Difficult Daughters and The Gallery? I mean, it spanned 3 decades almost, right?
Yeah, I must thank the sponsors of the HLF for having me. Thank you. It's always because writers are so isolated. I'm just sitting at home in my study writing, and I never meet a reader except on occasions like this. So, and these occasions only come when I publish a book, so that's nice. As for my journey and my trajectory, first of all, I am not one of those who always wanted to be a writer. I was a teacher. I taught English literature at Miranda House for 30 years almost. And because I taught literature, writing seemed something very, something way up there, not something I could aspire to. But after Salman Rushdie published Midnight's Children, there was an explosion of writing in India. I guess everybody felt they could be a writer, and everybody was writing. They had acquired a language, they had acquired a confidence, they had this desire to tell their stories in a language and an idiom that was not like Queen's English, but was something that they were going to fashion. So everywhere around me, people were writing, and I thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. I had started with poems, with plays, with short stories, but poems, plays, and short stories are hard to get published. And if you're working so hard on a piece of writing, you do want it to see the light of day. And I was told that if you want anything to see the light of day, for sure, write a novel. I mean, novels are the things that are easiest to publish. They may be the hardest to write, the longest to write, but the easiest to publish. So I said, "Theek hai, let's try a novel." I've tried everything else. So I started with, and I remember starting and thinking, okay, 2 years. I'm going to give this project 2 years. And I got a notebook and I put a full stop. I mean, that was really, I put a full stop at the end of the notebook, honestly. I knew nothing about writing, nothing. So, Difficult Daughters started out being the story of a dissatisfied woman in her 40s. I mean, okay, that was me, alone in a DDA flat and divorced. Okay, that was not me. But in order to understand this woman's story, I decided to look at her mother. And to look at her mother's story, I decided to look at her mother. So we have 3 generations right there. Sometimes I think that maybe because I've been a teacher of English literature, trained in that medium, I just think of things in terms of text and context, text and context. Without the context, the text makes no sense. And I have tried to prove, and that's the way I think of my books and my characters. They all span years and generations. The longest one was the one before this, which was Brothers, which spanned 80 years. So, after 80 years, I was kind of fed up because you have to do so much research, you have to get it right. So, so this is the way I tackle my fiction. I think of a theme, though not of a story. Each book, I mean, maybe again, because I've been a teacher, so each book I have a theme that I want to illustrate. Now, with Difficult Daughters, it was, why do educated women lead such emotionally uneducated lives, making the wrong choices, right, left, and center, confused, not knowing how to straddle the professional and the private. And in fact, that has been a running theme throughout my work. I mean, now that I've written 7 novels, I can see the common thread, though before I couldn't. First of all, I'm very concerned with the home because I think that's where values play out. That's where values are formed, and that's where values are played out, whether they're patriarchal values or socioeconomic constraints on its members, whether male or female. The family is the kind of microcosm of a larger society macrocosm. So that's why I think it's terribly important to see the way these connections are formed, the way these issues are played out. It's easier to do it in a small section of people rather than in a whole society. Okay, so that's the society part. The other part is, so far as women are concerned, how do they straddle their desires, their need for expression, their need for growth, their individual selves with what is expected of them. Very often, these are at odds. Very often, these are 2 sets of demands. One, the woman on herself, that she is placing on herself, and one that people outside her are placing on her. So how are these negotiated? How does she do it? There's no one answer, and there's no final solution. It's just a process. In a way, it's a constant process. It's a daily thing. And that is really where my stories lie. And in this book, well, okay, have I answered?
Yes. So maybe I can just push that a little bit further. This morning we had a talk by a Norwegian writer who was talking about, she's written something called Smash the Patriarchy, a term that many of us, of course, are familiar with. And one of the things that struck me is, not just in this morning's talk, but yesterday, Srilata, the poet, also writes about negotiations in the home for women. And for feminists, of course, the home has been a fraught frontier for their politics. And I know that you're not often described as a feminist writer, but I'm just wondering how you place your stories within, let's say, a feminist framework, since you've also been an academic. Yeah.
I'm a total feminist, I don't think how you can be a woman and not be a feminist. What does being a feminist mean? You just want some equality. That's all you want. Is that so hard? Yeah, that's so hard. So what was your question, Usha?
How do you place your work within, let's say, a feminist framework?
Yeah, so, I would place it squarely center in the feminist framework, even though I'm not a strident feminist, because, my books, I want readers to think about situations when I write. I'm not telling them anything. I'm not directing them. They're not didactic. I don't want to be didactic because I find that boring and doesn't work, and in a piece of art, didacticism has no place. So, but yet, do I have a certain message? Yes, I do. What is my message? I just want people to think about things, that's all. To think about familiar things. That you recognize the situation, but you think about it in a different way. Think about either its injustice or its unfairness, its injustice. Is it, and its necessity, is it necessary? Are these attitudes that we take for granted, shouldn't we be questioning them? Whether it's attitudes of, relationships between the genders, or in this, there's a lot of class stuff.
Yeah.
So in this book, I'm also talking about class. So attitudes about class. And at least most people in India have something to do with domestic workers. And in this book, there are two sets of families that, live together. One is the employer of the other. And the woman employs a maid from Nepal, and they each have one daughter, almost identical in age, and these daughters grow up together. What does it mean, at least in Delhi, because I live in Delhi, what does it mean to be surrounded by, aspirational models, role models? What prevents you from attaining what you want to attain? What pushes you to attain them? Things like that. So in this book, I also there's a lot of class uneasiness with, Meenal, the main character, because she's the one who hires Maitri, it's her husband who hires her, but she's the one who has to do with her morning, noon, and night. And actually, this book started from, I told you I start with themes. So this book started with the theme of how do we deal with our employees? Because at least for domestic staff, they're the first people you see in the morning. They're the last people you see at night. They facilitate your life in every which way. You facilitate theirs by giving them employment, and where I live, giving them a place to live. But what is your relationship? How much does each know the other? How much is each empathetic with the other? What is the connection? It's a very close connection, but is it a purely matlabi connection? Is there any other thing behind it besides guilt? A lot of guilt in this book, lot. Okay. So that's the thing.
So would you like to read something from the gallery that maybe captures some of this?
Okay. How many years have passed? 18 years have passed from the beginning to now. And these two girls are ready for college. And, okay, so that's a section. What is English honors, Mem Sahab? Asked Mati. Tashi, that's her daughter, keeps saying it's her dream to do English. It's one useless subject, equips you for nothing. Then, unless you are very fluent in the language, you don't get marks. Tashi got 85% in English. High enough, no? Meenal thought of Elora's, that's her own daughter's comment, you had to dumb down your English to get marks. The English board exam demanded answers that were multiple choice or just a few lines. How could this prepare you for literature? Excellent marks, Mati, but isn't it better to do something that helps you get a job? She likes painting. How about a fine arts course? Design is important in many aspects of life. Next morning in the quarters, Mem Saab says English doesn't qualify you for anything. Also, language has to be perfect. Is she saying Tashi's English isn't? Demanded Krishna, that's the father, who could not really tell. I don't know, said Mati. I want to do English, said Tashi, to stake her claim to a useless education. When it came to English, colleges did not trust commerce students, demanding an insanely high aggregate. But don't worry, Tash, you'll get in somewhere. Everybody does, why not you? In Miranda House, I have a chance in philosophy honors or Sanskrit honors, shuddered Tashi. Even the integrated course is more difficult to get into. Krishna got the Delhi Polytechnic forms for his daughter to fill. Tashi stared resentfully at them. She would rather die than go to a polytechnic. And Elle, what would she feel after helping her so much with DU? When she gave the completed forms to her father, he asked suspiciously, have you done it properly? You can check, she said cruelly. He stuffed the folder into his satchel. The computer course, however, was fully booked, and she was low enough on the waiting list to make waiting meaningless. Now, the whole thing about this is really how education kind of, okay, it's a means for Tashi to, her mother is illiterate and her father is class 10 pass in Nepal. So while her father is really, really keen, both the parents are really keen for the daughter to be educated as much as possible because they feel it will give her opportunities in life that they didn't have. But as a result of the education, it divides her from her parents because they can't really identify with what she's going to, they don't understand what she's studying, they can't help her. And so this divide just grows.
Yeah, and we see this kind of alienation. The story that you're telling through Tashi and Elora actually is something I think many of us who teach in public universities, for instance, would be familiar with. The sort of politics, it's a subtler politics that enters the classroom. And you did mention that in this novel, the class, guilt about class or the class divide in some ways is a theme. And I just wanted to ask you how you react to the description that I've read in some places that you are India's Jane Austen. I know that's a colonial comparison and we don't necessarily want to use that in any comparative way, but it is a descriptor of sorts.
I love that comparison.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm super thrilled by it, but anyway. I don't think I am, I'm just not good enough, but anybody calls me Jane Austen and I'm happy. So.
Yeah, well, 3 decades of writing, I think, qualifies you, if not more. So I just have another question relating to the women in your stories. They're far from perfect. Of course, nobody's perfect, but in many ways, people who write sometimes fall in love with their characters. And in falling in love with their characters, they're hesitant to display their weaknesses and their own biases. But you don't do that. And actually, Meenal in the book she's not an entirely likable character. despite all the familiar guilt that all of us bear, right? I'm just wondering, how you approach character construction. How do you, by the time you finish the 2 or 3 years of living with that person, how do you, what has been your starting point and how do you go further?
Yeah, I live with my characters, but I'm not the kind of writer who says my characters run away with the story. My characters do exactly what I want them to do. There's no question of their running away anywhere. I control them. I'm the writer, I'm the creator, and they do what I want. So they're not something outside me. But as for likable and unlikable, I guess I want to create characters that are authentic, that whatever happens to them, whatever their reactions are, you should be able to see the seed of it right from the beginning. That's where text and context comes in. So you should be able to see, okay, this, like women, they're, especially women, I guess, in some ways, they want approval. They'll do a lot to get approval, to get love, to get, to have a place in the family that enables them, that gives them a place in the family will then give them a place in society, that will give them a place in community, that has all these places connected to it. So how do you deal with that? And then you will deal with that either in a dishonest way sometimes, hiding your own motives, or to do kamchalao stuff, just to get by because your heart isn't in it. So people are full of contradictions, and because their situations are so conflicted, I try to present these contradictions as something that, happen. I mean, well, everybody's full. What I'm saying is, my aim in writing my books and my characters to absolutely true to life as I see it around me. They have to be authentic, they have to be believable, nothing. And in the end, you shouldn't say, oh, I didn't see that coming. I don't approve of such endings. I don't approve of melodrama, I don't approve of surprise endings, I don't approve of something that's imposed on the characters just to finish the book. It all has to be organic. And I spend many years and many drafts trying to make it so. Yeah, so it's all very difficult, huh? Nobody should be a writer. So
you come to a literary festival and say that?
I know.
Yeah. Would you like to read something that displays Minal, perhaps?
Okay, so this is also about, okay, I'll just read 2 more small sections. So this is and the distance between Tashi and Alora, when they fall in love, and when that becomes even more stark, who loves them, who do they feel they are attracted to, will that feeling be returned, and so on and so forth. The distance between Tashi and Alora grew when Alora fell in love. On a Saturday morning, Alora called to say, let's go to Cafe Turtle. We can talk in peace there, and we have a lot of catching up to do. I want to know about MH, about Philo, everything. Anyway, they go to this cafe. What's up, said Tashi when they had ordered coffee and a slice of blueberry cheesecake to share. Gosh, Tash, you look so pretty. Isn't there anybody out there who's caught your interest? Only loser types. I get rid of them very quickly. The university is full of losers, that is true. One never had this problem in school. No, never, agreed Tashi. Oh, Tash, and Alora looked dreamy. You met someone. Tashi slapped Alora's wrist to show her approval and beamed. Who is he? Rana, in my carpool. Tashi was only human. That meant when she heard this, she had to struggle with jealousy that instantly overcame her. Elle had everything so easy, so easy. It simply wasn't fair. Same college, same locality. The parents probably knew each other. If she wanted to marry tomorrow, she could. And that too, love marriage. To Alora, into these seconds, really just a few, came the unwelcome thought that maybe Tashi wasn't happy for her, in which case, stupidly, she had given her reason to feel jealous. Who knew whether she and Rana would last? First loves often broke up. To be naive and starry-eyed was simply not cool. That was why she had chosen to tell Tash rather than anyone in college. Her mother was always trying to draw her attention to the disparity between Tashi and herself and the problems this could cause, but she had never paid attention. They had grown up together. What did backgrounds matter? Such a regressive way to think. Then nobody could be anybody because of their backgrounds. But maybe it wasn't necessary to share every single detail of one's life. She knew Tash was hurt by what she perceived as neglect. She knew she was leaving her behind, and that made her feel like a snob. She was not a snob, she was not. But what could she do? Many of her classmates were in MH, but instead of making connections easier, it only made the gap more obvious. So then that continues, and then I have a last section to read. Shall I read it? Okay, this is about Meenal and her mother. Meenal, and this is right towards the end of the book, I think maybe 22 years have passed, yeah. Meenal looked at her cell phone, her mother. Beta, finally you pick up. Last 2-3 weeks, so many messages I have sent, you did not reply. Mama, I did. I am fine, talk later. You call this a reply? Mothers, always wanting the last bloody detail of your life. I was busy, Mama. Tell me, how is the gallery doing? Sunita Vanita, that's her sisters-in-law, working from morning to night. But beta, these resident artists you send, they are not so friendly. Though I invite them for meals, for chit-chat, once or twice they come, then nothing. And now you've made it 2 months instead of 1. She runs an artist residency. They need the time, space, and freedom to think, as though this didn't apply to everybody, herself above all. But, she went on, from next year, you will not have to put up with the artists, with any artist, because Alok and I are thinking of a trial separation, and I am going to move to Chandigarh. Why do you, then her sisters-in-law called, why do you want to leave your lovely home? There was never any sign of things going wrong. And even if there are difficulties in a marriage, and which marriage is without difficulties, it gets sorted out in time. Meenal gripped her phone in annoyance. Tell my mother my mind is made up, and if she or anybody else tries to make me change it, I can always go somewhere else. Do you think anybody decides to leave on a whim? Can't you trust me about my own life? Token protests, end of call. Almost every day she had to deal with the backwash of family concern. What will happen to you? You don't know what you're doing. Marriages are like this only, but that doesn't mean you leave. The daughters-in-law tried to do their own bit of blackmail. Mummy in her 80s, very difficult for her to take. Were they wanting her to wait till Mummy died? Shouted Meenal, guilty, because this was something she had thought of herself. And she ended up howling on the phone because she was so miserable and she just couldn't go on, and they didn't know what it was like. Everywhere she turned, there was a person to be considered.
That last sentence, I think that about sums up the way a lot of women think. Everywhere you look, there's a person to be considered. So I think we have a little time for questions from the audience. I already see one hand up right in front. Okay. Do we have a volunteer who can take the mic? We just...
My question to you is, as an English literature teacher and a writer, do you tend to critically analyze your own words as you write, especially in the initial drafts? Because when you analyze, you cannot move forward. So how do you manage the entire thing? That's what I want to know.
That's a really good question. She asked how I managed being a teacher of literature and a writer. How do I look at my words critically? And actually, I also thought before I started writing that being a teacher of literature would help me in some way, you know. I'd be able to produce really good books because I was so immersed in the stuff. But that is simply not true. I don't look at my words critically because I can't. I'm too close to them. And being a teacher of English literature did not help at all. In fact, sometimes I thought it was a disadvantage. But see, when you teach a book, you look at it from the outside in. You know, you're looking at it from the outside. You're trying to see what makes it work, look at characters, plot, all the things you look at. But when you are writing, you don't look at, you're looking at it from the inside out. So there is almost no connection between the two. You just say, how can I push this forward? How can I write my next incident? How can I not feel blocked? How can I, all those things. Well, no, it doesn't come in the way. You don't let it. I mean, writers really, if writers have power over anything, it is over their own book now. So, you know, you just say, away. And as I said, it's a difficult process. So no, you don't let it come in the way.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manju Kapoor, for that beautiful session. So my question is, so much of a woman's life is restricted by circumstances, restrictions that she herself puts on herself, and you know, people around her, the society. So how do you find, as a writer, how do you inject the joys of her life, and isn't the restrictions, the sorrows a bit too overwhelming? Then?
How do I inject?
The joys, the happiness, the, yeah.
You know, gosh, I hope my books aren't entirely bleak. Joy is you know, joy doesn't push the narrative forward. That's the trouble with joy and happiness, you know. Okay, theek hai, they're happy and they're joyful. What more can you say? You can't say anything. I mean, so because it doesn't push the narrative forward, it's not a very useful way for a writer to think. I don't want my books to be completely bleak. I don't believe in complete bleakness. I do believe in hope somewhere. So I hope that's built into the narrative. That's for my readers to decide. But this joy, happiness business is, I don't know. I guess I don't deal in it. So.
I mean, I think if one were to add to that, I think it is the overcoming or the negotiations that produce a space where joy becomes possible. So if one stayed in a difficult situation and did nothing about it, there would be no question of joy. But I think, you know, towards the end, what I'm seeing in this last reading is that a recognition of the complexities and the decision to deal with them in some ways produces the possibility of joy.
Yeah. I think, what does everybody want in life? You know, you want some kind of fulfillment. You want to be able to live a life of integrity. That's what you want. That's what would make you happy, but that's a secondary thing. And so, I mean, in all my books, and not only my books, but in many books, the characters are struggling towards that, to create a situation in which they overcome the obstacles and difficulties with which they have been landed, really. Everybody is just landed with stuff that they don't really want to be landed with, but then what do you do after that? And especially, I think, women, they tend to be landed with a bit more. So maybe because of patriarchy, because of assumptions, and because in many ways they just have less freedom. So they are fighting for freedom. They're fighting for autonomy. They're fighting for integrity. They're fighting to be the kind of woman they feel they can be with some kind of, to lead some kind of fulfilling life. That's what they...
We
Yeah,
can
they
take
want.
one more question. Yes.
Hi, thank you for a very inspiring session. This is coming out of curiosity. I do believe that some of your books have been used into web series. I think A Married Woman and Ekta Balaji Films also, I think, it's taken Custody and Immigrants. I wonder from your point of view, if you had the freedom to choose one of your novels that could be turned into a film, which one would it be?
You know, gosh, yeah, they have been turned into web series and this and that. And, you know, I deal with words, I don't deal in images. So, I mean, each of my books, I think, oh, wow, this would make a each of them, actually. But then, you know, the complexity of a character, I feel, can't really, I mean, the visual medium functions in another way. And so, and that's why, although I have, you know, and now Soni Razdan is making a film on Difficult Daughters, and I mean, now they're very hopeful of doing it. She's had the rights for 20 years, but, so I don't see I don't see them because I don't relate to them, actually.
Do you not, like you said Soni Razdan, so do you interact with her while she's...
No.
Not at all.
You know, a writer is a solitary person. This media thing is anything but. You know, you're working with so many people. The very idea is scary, you know, and I am given the option of when I sign the contract that how much do I want to do, and I always say nothing. I want to do nothing. The book is out in the world. I mean, people have said, why do you let your books be murdered like this?
Yeah, in the web series, I do believe they were murdered because I've read a few of them, especially A Married Woman, and I mean, they just reduce them from the complexity and nuance to a very straightforward black and white world, which is so unfair to the book. That's why I asked this question.
I know. The thing is that when you're a writer, you want your book to live. Like, okay, when I was teaching in MH, I taught Frankenstein. Frankenstein, every 20 years, went through some kind of, I mean, now it's film, but it used to be stage versions, there was a musical, there were all kinds of things that were not at all true to Frankenstein in any way. But Frankenstein lives. It lives today. And I think this is part of the reason, you know, it's there in, you know, in popular imagination in whatever way. So a writer wants her work to live, you know, that's why you're slogging away, that's why you put it, I mean, it's not just here today and gone tomorrow. You want it to have some kind of life. And if this is one way of having it, that's fine. So, I don't know if it's one way of having it, but it might be. I'm not sure. So, that's the thing.
So I think we'll have to stop there. But Manju is here for a little longer, and if any of you would like to get copies of her books signed, perhaps we can move to the Writers' Lounge and you can meet her there, because we'll need to leave the stage for the next program. So thank you all so much. Thank you so much, Manju, for the conversation.